Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Just Another Kill Team podcast, connecting kill team communities across the globe. If you're passionate about the tactical skirmish game that brings together strategy, lore, and creativity, you are in the right place. Don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and stay updated with our latest episodes. If you want to support the show, check out our Patreon. Your support means a lot to us. Follow us by using the social media links in the podcast description for all the latest news, and be sure to leave a review to let us know what you think. Thanks for tuning in. Here's today's episode.
I mean, it's been a long time since we caught up with you in the German scene, and interestingly enough, I bumped into a random guy from Germany who was visiting New York and talked a little bit about his chunk of the German scene, Konstantin.
Nice.
That's an Asian dude from a different part of Germany. I mean, Germany's a big place, though.
Yeah. Well, most of the kill team scene is centered in the western part. So, yeah. I'm really happy that now it's starting to grow a bit more in the eastern parts, around Berlin and Leipzig, where I'm from. Yeah.
And we're going to talk, and you played Wreckas at the tournament yesterday?
I did. I didn't place all too well, but it was really just a nice experience because this team is such fun to play, and it really is. You don't really. Yeah, I wasn't sad that I lost because it was such a fun game to play with them, and it was also pretty close in the end. So, in terms of balancing, the last two games I lost by only 2 or 3 points, and it came down to the last activation of every one of us. So, if my last activation would have gone well, then I would have won the game, and the other way around. So it was really close in the end. Yeah, great games. I had great games, but I also had the worst matchups I could possibly have with the team. Speaking of Nemesis Claw, and also what was the other game? Void Dancer Troop was also really hard. But I managed to have a tie with the Void Dancer player.
So it was a 3-round total? You had Nemesis Claw, Void Dancer Troop?
We had 4 rounds.
4 rounds.
I first played Rattlings. It was a fun game. Second, Void Dancer Troop. Then I had a game versus... what was the third game? Against the Mandrakes. Also pretty hard match for me, which I lost by 2 or 3 points. I don't know. And the last one was Nemesis Claw.
The dastardly Mandrakes.
Yeah, it was. I did forget the one play Mandrakes have, and I was so self-confident charging my orc into a Mandrake, and they have this ploy that they fight first if you charge them. Yeah. And I totally forgot about that, and my orc...
Shadows bite. Yeah.
I was down to 10 wounds with this orc, and Mandrake being the attacker then with this ploy, and he two-shotted me. I couldn't do anything about it.
Even with just a scratch up, huh?
I had used it because it was the last activation of the game, and I had used it already, so I couldn't scratch that off, and then I died it in my own charge, which was it was sad. But...
the slow and insidious killer.
Yeah.
All right.
But this team is it's so fun to play. It's lore wise so accurate and funny to watch the team unfold and roll so much dice.
And like the silliness of it just like makes it even more like easy to be a fun-spirited player.
Yeah, that's true.
It is very much like a good synthesis of the orc vibe and kind of like the rules syncing up. Like commandos are like the sneaky beat 'em up boys. You got some explosions going, and then you get like a couple hero plays. But Wreckas really are like a wall of orcs, just like in olden days in the stories, that just walk up and brutalize you.
That's correct.
It's fantastic.
And the best response I had from different people was, this is such a straightforward team, you know? There's no cheesy elven tricks like, oh, I'm dying, but I'm not dying actually, or I'm teleporting somewhere else, or you can't target me because... You can't, you know, there's no tricks like that. It's just a straightforward thing, and everybody knows what they're doing. And
just run them down and chop them.
Yeah, and the brain load is really, really not so high on that team. That was the response I got from many people in the
It is a
tournament.
pretty straightforward team. I think one of the fun things about being a straightforward team, and I think that Jason, repeated a lot in the last year, was the less that you have to think about your rules, the more you can focus on playing like fundamentals, like being in the correct position, making sure that you're making the correct attacks, playing against your opponent's attack ops. Those are all things that I think the Wreckas get to do kind of in spades, because you're really just focused on like, how do I best hit my opponent really hard in the face?
And then if you have a ton of reps with something that is like an easy team, like Intercession at the time, Angels of Death are going to be pretty simple as well. Wrecka, then like when you come against the Mandrakes and you have seen the Shadows bite before, having a whole plan to work around, and like you remember it because that was such an impactful moment that like the Mandrakes fight first. So it's like you have a whole answer for it with bait them out into the open, or shoot them from point blank, or save your just a scratch for the Shadows bite.
Yeah, I really forgot about that one. And also, I played them on Volcus terrain, and the one cheesy play of Mandrakes is you teleport one of them to the highest platform, and you cannot be attacked on the top of that because no other base will fit on that platform. And if he's on concealed, you can't even shoot him from below. You can throw a grenade because indirect is no thing anymore. And this one Mandrake was there, turning point 1 till the end, and did this surveillance tech-up thing. Yeah, and scored full.
And I think actually what I saw yesterday at our yearly invitational, basically that capstones my local shop's kind of competitive year, is that if you have the Dirge Maw, you can actually preface any model that would be going up there normally. So against the other teams that camp on infiltration, Commandos being one of the big ones, where you have a Grot fly up to the top as the first activation, you can Dirge Maw to stall that model, and then if they try to go, the Dirge Maw teleports first. So you have to set up. You basically, when your opponent is trying to block it, they have to use a ladder, set a model, and take reposition as their first move. And if they do all those things, your opponent also can try to play the scouting metagame, which is circled all the way back around from Kill Team last edition, where scouting for going first mattered a lot, and now it feels like it matters less. But against teams with infiltration cheese or cheesy teams, now that circle of life has come all the way back around. And your opponent, if you know they're taking reposition, you take strategy ploy and throw it away because it's not going to do anything. But now your Dirge Maw teleports onto the point. So the first layer of beating that Mandrake's plan for cheesing the infiltration, and probably Commandos too, I would assume, because this is like the same play pattern, is you need to win roll-off. So you have one 50-50 there. And then the second 50-50 is metagaming, or really mind gaming your opponent into the scouting choice, where you're like, I'm going to take reposition. And then you circle all the way back around to the next layer and take option 1, which gets you an equipment option. So you place the ladder and then move as your first activation to go onto the point.
So then you've got the activation before them, but they could still get you with the Dirge Maw, couldn't they?
They could get you with the Dirge Maw, but this would allow you to beat the Commandos. Actually, the reason why it would beat the Dirge Maw if you take ladder is now your opponent has Dirge Maw, a specific operative, but you just use a different operative to do the ladder. You just have 2 people set up to run up a ladder, and then to just have your, you show the ladder at the very last second instead of prepping it during your equipment option.
Well, the other way around this would be that you don't give him a valid target, because that's the second thing for the infiltration checkup, right? He needs to have a valid target.
They do have to be a valid target. So you can play looking behind your back for the whole game, which is at least very, very on theme.
Yeah, but it's not very orcish.
No, it's not very orky at all.
That's true. Yeah, like the 10,000 foot overview, the easiest thing to solve against the Mandrakes doing that is if you do win the roll-off, you put the tall vantage in their territory, and then it's not a legal point to do their surveillance from.
Oh. Yeah, that's why it's like that. That's like the very, very layer 1 is if you win the roll-off, you just give your opponent that side, and you're like, all right, we'll just play normally, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they can still like teleport into your back lines and surveil you from like the very back corner, which is still something to watch out for. At least you can
interact with them. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is kind of the nightmare situation. They are a very strong team with lots of ability to kind of get you pretty good right now.
The one thing that really helped against them with Orcs was you get +1 APL if you do a fight or a shoot action. So the base orc guy has 2 APL, and then you gain +1 if you fight or shoot. And then this lasts until the start of your next activation. So whenever a Mandrake is shooting at you, you would save on your APL stats. So 1s are crits, 2s are normal saves. But with 3 APL, you have a better chance to survive shooting of them.
That's kind of funny.
Of course, you need more shooting before.
Yeah. Love that.
So how has, kind of the German scene been doing? I know we're going to talk about Wreckas at some point later on in this, but I'm kind of curious, it's been like a year since we last had you on, roughly, and Germany, it sounds like, has had a lot more players. There's a couple of different scenes. It sounds like there's a little bit of an East and West scene growing. So tell us a little bit about that before we hop into more Wrecka deep dives.
Yeah, I have the feeling that it kind of exploded with the launch of the 3rd edition. And so many people came up and were interested in playing intro games and starting to flood our channels with questions about the game. So since the edition dropped, it's really in Leipzig it almost doubled the player count. We have this little WhatsApp group where we meet up and talk about rules and stuff, and it really it doubled. It's the double amount now. Some people also went away because they don't like this 3rd edition, but it's really a few people, and suddenly lots of tournaments are popping up around here, and it's going really well.
Yeah, that's great to hear. It seems like it's been pretty similar. It's like what you described is pretty much the same thing that happened here. We haven't actually, I don't think we've checked in on the New York scene from Travis, like on that metric in a while. Like, was that pretty similar for you too over there, Travis?
Yeah, I think Kill Team, I see, the longer we do this stuff, the more I see how Games Workshop's kind of cyclical nature comes to help and hurt scenes. At the end of the 3-year marker, you get this huge infusion of energy. And we definitely have had that in the New York area. We've had I think 10 or 12 brand new faces kind of show up and want to play Kill Team. So definitely I've seen the boost, and they're all kind of at different stages of wanting to be competitive, getting their teams painted, worrying about how their teams look, all of that fun stuff at the beginning of playing the game. So it's cute, and it's been going well. So,
I also think that they didn't really fulfill this goal of making it more streamlined and more simpler, but in a way it worked out for some rules. And it's a bit more straightforward than the edition before. At least to 90%, I'd say. There still are some rules that were elaborated over the community and over the years, and they just decided to leave that out for the new edition, for this one. Like they forgot about the achievements we had. But yeah,
there was definitely a couple of things that got wound back over time, but I think overall, broadly, we're all kind of waiting with bated breath at this point. It's the 12th, and we're excited to see what a theoretical data slate looks like. However, we are all still waiting for the theoretical data slate.
Yeah, it's about time it drops now. But I'm glad it didn't drop one day before my tournament yesterday.
Were you in a situation where if it had dropped, you guys would have tried to institute it immediately?
Yeah, it was the question if we would have. I think it would have, when it would have dropped one day before, I would have made a democratic questioning if we should play by the old rules or should we adapt. I would have left it to the people who were there, but it didn't happen. So I made my own little FAQ for the tournament.
Oh, nice. Another community FAQ.
We had 3 Necron players, and it wasn't clear if the Magnify rule, how it was actually ruled if you have a model on a vantage point. If your Cryptech or anyone is shooting through the other Necron model, and if that model is on the vantage point, how is it then ruled with the cover rules? If the enemy target is on the floor, do you get accurate 1 or do you get the double cover save if you're concealed and stuff? And that was not so clear.
Yeah, I think the general raw ruling that I've seen, and the one that I made at the New York Open, was that if you get all of your obscurity from the second target, and you just draw valid targeting from the first. So there's a couple weird things. So you're getting like vantage and stuff from whatever your first target is, and you're getting obscurity from your first target, but you get to selected target in the valid targeting step from the first spot. So it's a little weird. It's definitely some stuff that could use a little bit of work. Necron's obviously still doing pretty good, I assume. Who ended up winning your local tournament?
Well, surprise, it was the Warp Coven player.
All right, nice. The Warp Coven can't be stopped, huh?
Nah, apparently not. I mean, I didn't have to face him in the tournament, but yeah, when I look at the stats, it seemed so easy for him to roll through us all. But it's also a good player, so it was.
Confluence of things tends to work out well in good players' favors.
Yeah. Second place was actually Necrons. Yeah, and the third place was Mandrakes. There was another Wrecka player who ended up being the fourth, but he had much easier matchups when I looked at it.
I see. Yeah, Wreckas definitely seem like an interesting team. They don't seem obviously overpowered by any metric, and their stats have shown that they're like doing okay. I think they're like at the 50-ish mark, which is pretty solid, but definitely not broken by any means.
Yeah.
And hearing that Warp Coven won a local tournament is probably not a big surprise to anyone listening to here or anywhere else. It's not like that they're explicitly the most overpowered team, because it doesn't look like their stats are, a 70% all the time, but they do have some piloting skill and they do have a lot of leeway. Some of the things that the best teams have is lots of room to make mistakes, and Warp Coven with, so much flexibility can give you a lot of room for mistakes depending on the matchup you're in. If you play against elites, you can take a couple more activations. You have a little bit more time to make your most powerful activations at the end of the turn when you need to. If you're playing against someone who's a little bit squishier, you can send in some Zangors to go deal with people. And obviously, depending on how you rule the teleport ability or the rewind ability, not teleport, whether or not you can make it a 9-inch teleport or a 6-inch teleport, it gives them a lot of leeway on their sorcerer movement too.
Yeah, in general, like one of the things that we've seen from the stats is, elites kind of like took everyone by storm, and they had like a huge spike, and it was like a big wave of craziness, and it has kind of calmed down a little bit. The top performance of a lot of these elites, like Warp Coven and Legionary, are still like absolutely amazing, but their overall win rate has kind of just been like falling more and more and more. And I think it's like people are kind of figuring out like how to play against it. It's less like.
Well, and lots of people don't pick the strong teams. In my experience, like me too, I don't want to play the overpowered team. It doesn't feel right to me. Or maybe I tend to play more the underdogs. Not so much to give me a challenge, but to not just feel bad if I totally table someone. It's not feeling all right.
Yeah, I've kind of been the same way for pretty much my whole arc of Kill Team as well.
Yeah, I do get the sense that a lot of people have kind of troubles wanting to play the most powerful stuff, because there is a little bit of a social contract when it comes to playing Kill Team of, you are going to hang out with that person for a little bit, and sometimes people feel a little bit weird about like, oh, I'm going to play the most powerful thing. But generally when you're going to these larger tournaments, that's not going to be a thing that happens. So being too caught up in those kinds of emotions, I think, is always kind of dangerous, because you can just end up in a spot where you're not playing the best you can, and you're not giving everyone else that wants to go to these larger tournaments the best experience they can. So there's always a little bit of a risk when you run into those things.
Yeah, if I would go to such a big tournament like Worlds, of course I'd pick the strongest team because I wanted to win. But yesterday it wasn't my aim to place to make it to. But I do all the prizes myself. I'm producing the, how's to say, what did you say that in English? The trophies. Yeah, I built the trophies support myself. Yeah, I built trophies for 1 to 3rd place and also for best painted. So it would be a bit awkward to hand self-made trophy to myself.
The meme of the Obama that just like places the trophy on himself.
It was really such a fun thing. I have to say that again, because even Warp Coven was slightly overpowered, and also Necrons. We had such a great time with everyone because there was not a single salty moment in this. Everybody was happy for the other, and it was such a friendly atmosphere for such a competitive game. It was just perfect.
Yeah, that's like my favorite thing about Kill Team. I mean, Kill Team is an amazing game, but it seems like everywhere I go, the community has been amazing. Like the stuff I travel for, the local things, everyone has just been like amazing sportsmanship.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the sportsmanship and also like the love of the game is definitely apparent. Yesterday we had our end of the year invitational, and we had 4 rounds in one day, and we had a couple people drop out. But I think the third place, second place match, they were just there because they're like, I just want to play Kill Team for the 4th round, even though we were all pretty burnt out at the end of 4 rounds for a day, because 4 rounds of like fully competitive Kill Team against our like 11 other best players in our local area, definitely pretty exhausting.
But that's like the standard amount of games, right? 4 games in one day, isn't it?
We only do 3 normally, because normally our local scenes, like, we'll play the last bonus round at a later date if they want to. But the 4th round, when you go to a big tournament, sometimes it's you get a little bit of you get some downtime, in the first round if it's not as competitive, or if you've lost the game and your next opponent is like, you're just there to hang out. There's definitely the vibe sometimes of some people are just like, I just want to play, but I don't want to play, right? Yeah. Whereas when it comes to the invitational, it's only the players who all know their rules and are really trying to push you into an awkward spot.
Yeah, I have the same experience that the 4th game is always the hardest, because in Germany, or maybe in the tournaments here in Germany, they all have 4 rounds. It's like you don't do it below 4 rounds. And also my dudes from my local club who play Warhammer 40k, they say if you announce you make a tournament with 3 games, then no one will come. You have to make 4 rounds. So I thought that was like that everywhere. But I put how to say it. I told the missions to the people beforehand, so it was clear from the beginning. We play first game this mission, second game we play sabotage, third game we play upload. So I picked for the last round, I picked secure, so nobody had to think about it, because it's just easy to play.
Yeah, we kind of lucked into that situation where the final round we rolled off and we got secure.
Yeah.
Although technically we rolled loot, but then I thought it was secure, because it turns out that secure and loot have been switched around in the mission packet, and loot was mission 1 for a single 3-year period of time, so it's burned into my memory circuits, so I just assumed. So we played secure on accident, but I guess it's good that we didn't play loot. New York Open, we rolled the last round into loot, and everyone had a big audible groan, so I think we're glad to not play loot again.
Yeah.
Are you guys in Germany finding the new missions to be broadly positive? Are there any that you guys are trying to avoid at this point in the overall like metagame cycle?
Well, overall the response is pretty positive. So, and I like the new missions, but some are not all too clear to me how they should be handled. For instance, this upload thing, where it says you have to put points on the marker, and then you decide to bank them, right? And then it says you cannot score any more from that marker. But does this is this be true for everyone, for every player, or is it just for you? Can the enemy player score on the marker again or not?
Yeah, I think upload is one of the ones that surprisingly enough, for me, when I read it, I thought it seemed pretty straightforward, where you can put points in the buckets and you can only score from each bucket once.
Yeah.
It's been interesting to see people kind of bump into the rules and question whether or not once you've done it, your opponent can't do it. I think generally the way we've been playing it, at least in the New York area, is you can put as many points as you want in all the buckets, but if your opponent puts a point in, you lose all of your points. So you got to defend the points. And then on the other side, you can only score each bucket once. So it's really kind of like a take your ground, hold your ground mission with a little bit of a gambit. Because if you score early and then push forward, you open up like a hole in your scoring window for your opponent to come poke around at you. And you also incur risk. So you can take those 3 points early and then push up. But if you don't take them, now you want to play defensively. So it's a fun little gambling mission, I think, where you have a little bit of pressure to interact with your opponent that way.
Most of them are like that, and that's what I really like about it. You have those points, one in the middle, one in the enemy territory, one in your territory, and you have to not too much strategic thinking about your critical ops, but enough to make it interesting, you know?
Yeah, nothing is free in this edition, which for the most part, I think is a broadly positive thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's one I like to avoid, but I can't remember what it is.
I suspect the one that you're trying to avoid would be the mission where you can run away with stuff, extraction.
Exactly. That's the when you pick the last one or activate the last mission objective marker, that's the one with the extraction, and then you can only score on that marker, correct?
Basically you score 1 point for touching it, score 2 points for touching the second one, and then the last one you score 1 point for touching it. But in that same action becomes something you can pick up and run away with. And then everything
Correct.
else is off. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the one I hate. Because I understood it wrong many times.
Oh, interesting. You understood it wrong. So what did you understand it as?
Maybe I didn't read it correctly. There was one tournament I was on. I didn't know that the other markers were burned when the last extraction thing is banked, so to speak. So I activated the second one, and my opponent was looking at me like, "Really? Do you really want to do this?" Because I didn't read the mission text too well. So he ran away with the third marker, and I had no option to score it for the remainder of the game.
Yeah, it's definitely a big gotcha mission where as you're playing, you're like, oh wait, I've rushed these points, and now my opponent has access to picking it up and holding it, and he holds it for 1, 2, and then 2 points. So if you rush those first 3 points, thinking that those 3 points are valuable, your opponent now has access to the next 6 points unabated. So that one you really do need to like wait for your moment to strike.
It's particularly for anyone that is not super familiar with the mission. It's if you rush down the one in the middle and the one in your territory, the one that's left, which will become the only one worth points in the game, is going to be the one in the enemy territory. So if you're both kind of thinking about it in that way, it kind of becomes this like crazy game of chicken, where most of the time it's probably going to be you stage on your home base objective, and then you kind of like try to set up for being able to take the middle objective. Because if you do just kind of rush it down, the opponent will just take their safe home base objective and go for it. It is so interesting that so many of these missions can have all these way different approaches, because maybe my whole thing would be try to just rush down the enemy objective right off the bat. And if they, like the ones in my territory will be easier to like backtrack, or someone is still not that far from it to grab it. And like someone else might. It's just like the mindset you go into each mission with versus what your opponent's plan was is like a whole thing that is a major contribution to the game.
Yeah, and I think this kind of leads me into the fun part about Wreckas is you could just kind of ignore some of the missions sometimes. So if you're playing on extraction with Wreckas, instead of trying to play this high concept plan about figuring out when you're going to go into your opponent's area, you just stage up your guys next to your opponent's base at the midline, and then you break a bunch of holes at the beginning of turn 1, and then at the opening of 2 you just start sending guys in and causing a ruckus. Because if, like Jason was saying, if you attack your opponent's far base on extraction, now your backline objectives have room to be dangerous for them. So now they feel the pressure of having to fight on their side. And then the middle, running up into the middle and touching it, that's still pretty dangerous. You still don't want to do that. So if you're going to pull the ripcord, you pull the ripcord as far up as possible, and having asymmetric holes that your orcs can use that your opponent can't really see you from or fight you from means that on Volcus, you can really get extra mileage out of your boys getting ready to stage up on your opponent. And then if you have taken the primary op of ignoring both of those things, just playing kill op, you could just run at your opponent with your bomb squigs, pray for your opponent to explode, and throw all the plans out of array. You might not score that high, but you might still get a win. And I think for the most part, most tournaments are still doing wins as the most important thing.
Yeah, how do you actually play it over there? Because the win condition is you get tournament points, like a win is 3 points, a tie is 1 point, loss 0 points. What's the next tiebreaker? Because we had this experience that with the new edition and with newer teams, people tend to play slower, and we are not using chess clocks as of now. Maybe I'm doing it in the future. I don't know, but that means that we often cannot play until the very end of 4 turning points and score less overall points in the end. So if overall victory points is a tiebreaker, it creates maybe a different statistic in the end. So what are your tiebreakers on your tournaments?
I wanted to use primary op at the beginning of this edition. However, I've now looped back around to some version of strength of score or win pathing is probably one of the better secondary metrics, because you want to incentivize every opponent to play as hard as they can. And having strength of score, while it might not be very emotionally satisfying, does mean that you're rewarding players for their harder matchups, which I think is probably what we want. Obviously, different tournaments have different incentives, and I think for smaller events, having everybody just play for the most victory points probably works out fine.
Yeah, it was okay. But then if you play against a player who is a little bit slower, and so you end up having less victory points, although you won the game, it could maybe cause some feels bad.
How about you, Jason? What has your local scene been kind of landing on?
I mean, we've done a few things. Like, I was pretty big on strength of schedule for a while. But the thing that is troublesome there is if someone drops out, it messes up someone's strength of schedule. So it was like, maybe it was last year at Adepticon. I think if it was points instead of strength of schedule, I would have made the top 8 cut. But it was like a couple of the people that I beat had dropped from the event. So then they dropped my strength of schedule, and then I didn't make the top cut. And then after that, I was like, okay, at bigger events, people always drop. So that makes strength of schedule significantly worse. So I think at small events where like it's like a tight group of friends and people are gonna people are gonna play the whole time, it's a pretty good way to go. And for bigger ones, I mean, just like points. I mean, I still do kind of like primary, but I guess I'd have to think more about what Travis just said and brew on it a little bit more. But I also think that part of it is like with slow play, it's like you've got to. I think a good tournament player knows how to play quickly and also knows how to encourage another player to speed up a little bit. I mean, it's easy for me to say. I've been playing Elites 4 forever, and like all of my games against everyone are like 40 minutes. So it's just like, just give people all the targets they want and just sprint down the field.
Battle. Because everyone, as a person, you understand that everyone is like playing the game. Not everyone knows every single rule. So there's always going to be lookup time. There's always going to be all this stuff. So the 2 hours at the beginning of the edition, when a lot of people are on new things, definitely tends to drag. It'll probably be easier, this time next year when we're checking in with Germany again. But in the meantime, having some way to encourage people to go faster. At Worlds, we use clocks as a kind of encouragement mechanic rather than like an explicit you've done bad here, get hit on the head mechanic. And I think that worked reasonably well. However, not every group can have that as the mechanic because everyone's got time, So there's always going to be some weirdness.
Yeah.
And that's kind of hard to get away from. Locally, I use clocks basically kind of like to encourage people like, hey, you've playing a little slow, so we're just gonna put you on clock. It's not a punishment. However, at the Invitational, I did use it a little bit as a punishment. We had 2 players go overtime multiple rounds, so I just gave them less time on their clock. And then when they bumped into the end of the clock, I was like, well, hopefully this doesn't happen again ever. But I can't control that.
Yeah, that would be another reason to only play 3 rounds. So
I think the 4th round tends to be a lot for most people to play. So that is definitely a thing that is noticeable. Players tend to drag a little bit more at the end of the day because it's just been a long day. So I think 3 rounds, as long as everyone is not, as long as everyone understands like, hey, we're here to have fun and like build a community, then 3 rounds is fine because it's actually just a much chiller feel. I think LVO is doing 3 rounds a day, right, Jason?
I actually haven't looked into that yet. I haven't even like looked at all the other times I was so vigilant about looking at the terrain and like setting up things to practice, and now I like haven't looked at it at all, and I'm like, oh man, I gotta go like read the schedule, look at the terrain. Yikes.
All right. Well, it's good to know. Good to know that Jason's still tippity top of his metagame play.
Yeah, I've pretty much spent way more time than ever on painting. I'm trying to get better than the worst possible paint score. And now I'm suffering tactically because all that time painting would have, like, last year would have been just like looking at maps and thinking of plans and strategizing. So I guess you do got to kind of trade your victory points for paint. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I'll still do pretty well. I've got a lot of experience with Angels of Death and Space Marines and just like super aggressive elites in general.
I guess we'll find out very soon. You know, by the time this comes out, we don't know if it'll be LVO or not. So maybe we'll have known what the results are, and we'll put a little stinger here at the audio clip.
Do you feel bad, Jason, for not being able to put everyone on engaged when deploying?
You know, it was a change. I had to relearn the game. I was like, conceal orders? Wow. And like the fact that other people can shoot back if I try to shoot you on turn 1, which was not the case when everybody put everything on conceal. It's like, it's a whole other thing. So, yeah, and now I'm halfway through trying to find a new high tempo way to play, and I still think I haven't explored Wreckas at all, but I feel like maybe they would be Angels of Death. I feel like maybe do it better than the other elites, and Banshees, just pure Banshees, because that's been a lot of fun. I think it doesn't really work that well on Into the Dark, so I'd need another plan there. But on Volcus, Banshees are kind of insane. They definitely have that like all engage energy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Although it needs a bit of a help. But we'll see in the data slate, hopefully.
Yeah. So, June, I'm curious, how have you felt about the Wreckas as a broad team? Have you been enjoying everything they can do? Are you using them specifically to... How are you approaching like building a game plan against your opponents right now?
Well, overall, I have been enjoying them very much because they're a really fun team to play with not so many complicated rulings. And also for the opponent, it's good to have not those really... They have no real gotcha moments, you know. You cannot create any feel bads in a matchup. And yeah, lore-wise, it's just funny. And the overall consensus for now is that you don't go away from the standards setup of your team, like all the specialists and then one melee guy and one normal shooty guy. So I played that composition every game. And you have one option for one of the gunners that he can put either the pulsar rocket on his back or the rocket rack. You can only pick one. And against horde teams, it's better to have the pulsar rocket because it can create a 4-inch bubble of movement or injury thing for your opponent.
Injury, yeah. Not quite an injury, but pretty close to an actual injury.
Yeah, you get some bad things from being in that bubble. But versus elites, I tried the rocket rack, which is really scary. And I overall think that orcs are pretty good into elites. You can just one-shot a Space Marine. You can delete it off the board with the Wrecka points. There's not much they can do. And at that point, if you have enough Wrecka points, then your opponent's save doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter. And even your weapon skill doesn't matter on the orcs because you just put everything from a miss to a hit, you know? If a Space Marine, he cannot defend all 6 hits. All 6 hits. You only have 3 dice. And then you have the equipment option to change your blast rule into piercing 1 rule, so it's even less saving dice for your opponent. So save 6 hits with two save dice. Good luck.
Yeah, even if you get like double crit saves, you still take 16 damage. So it's just like that'll even kill things that have damage reduction. That'll kill leaders. That will just like horribly maim a leader with damage reduction, like the Nurgle champion, the Plague Marine champion, will just get like smoked.
Yeah, and it's really satisfying to see that. And in this game against Nemesis Claw, we were really trading 1 for 1. It was really a tight game, really fun. But I thought about using another setup for Volkus, for instance, because the one guy, the normal melee guy, the breaker boy, has this nice ability called break stuff, where you can either destroy your opponent's equipment, which is just hilarious. I like it. Or you can make a breach into the wall, much like the breacher of the commandos. So if you take 2 of those guys on Volkus, you can create more of those break points in walls to send your 2 squigs through, or maybe do some other stuff. So I definitely try that to have more of them, of the normal breaker boys in my team.
Yeah, that's kind of where I've landed as far as actual team comps is I have 2 boys and I chuck away one of the normal Rocketeers just because I haven't found as many shooting lanes generally when I approach a map. So having the ability to make the squigs more dangerous and my boys more dangerous has definitely been something that I've found useful.
Yeah. But also, there are matchups where you should put more shooty boys on your team, especially Nemesis Claw, but because they have this equipment. What's the name? Vox Jammer or something like that. And it says inside 8-inch of your operatives, Nemesis or Claw operatives, you cannot modify your APL stat. So that's especially bad for an Orc player, for a Wrecka Krew player, because you cannot gain your 3rd APL if you shoot inside of 8-inch of a Nemesis Claw operative. It's just so it feels like a hard counter to this team if you're playing Nemesis Claw. So then you should maybe field another Rocketeer and shoot them from outside of 8-inch to gain the 3rd APL.
The struggle is that they'll probably be obscured, though.
Yeah, I'm just expecting that I'm just going to fight my opponent and not get the APL and just play the fighting game and push up and beat people to death.
It's definitely possible too, but the worst thing was that, no, not the worst, but the match was also on ITD, where you really need the 3rd APL to open up doors.
So, okay, here's a interaction. If you fight and kill a Nemesis Claw, and now there's not a Nemesis Claw within 8 inches, now can you gain the APL?
Yeah, the question actually came up in my game, and you cannot gain it because it's
you're not removed.
During
you don't remove your opponent until after the end of the fight action, which would be too late.
Correct. You gain the APL during that shooting or fighting action. If you do and the
they're
action
still
you
there
do
during that.
Yeah, in that moment you would gain the APL, but in that moment the operative is still alive, so the Vox Jammer still is in place.
Dang.
Yeah, I would expect it to just play like a fair 2 APL team against a 3 APL team, play an unfair game, and just commit to the forward momentum, because I just haven't found the shooting to be particularly good against Nemesis Claw. And standing around in the back line with heavy reposition or heavy dash for the 4-up is just not consistent enough against obscured targets. So you're going to have some people within 6 anyways, so I'd rather just have more guys. Because a single Orc boy with Wog up probably can fight a Nemesis Claw operative if they get the charge off, so that's kind of where I've landed.
And I feel like the bomb squigs can do, I mean, I haven't like looked at the math that much or like rolled it out to see what it looks like, but I feel like the bomb squigs can do pretty massive damage to 1 or more elites. And if you can just like catch 2 Space Marines in a blast and do that a couple times with your bomb squigs, all of a sudden your 2 APL orcs is like no problem.
I can see a world where on In the Dark specifically, it can tend towards being a little bit harder, because you do have to open a couple doors and you're playing a 6 operative team with 2 APL. But I would just say in those situations, you've got 2 melee orcs that are pretty good at standing in doorways. You know, you've got the Crusher, who's got the armor, so he can only get actually parried or actually critical, and then you have the Demolisher, which is the big explosive hammer. And on In the Dark specifically, there's some extra silliness where if your opponent gives you a doorway fight, you can hook a shot with a hammer around a door and hit people. So depending on how well your opponent stages, they can just get themselves caught out.
And it wasn't really an game against Nemesis Claw. It was really a balanced game, because we traded 1-1, and it came down to the last activation, so he won, but it was really close. I almost won that game. Yeah, and you can definitely play it. Yeah, you're a bit hindered by the 2 APL thing, but not so much.
I think it's great to hear that, because that was like a thing that people were very spooked about on the internet, and just like having a real live story of a close game of Wreckas versus Nemesis Claw is awesome. Love to hear that.
Yeah, I survived a melter shot from one of the gunners. It was pretty amazing because I had just a scratch and saved really well. And yeah, saved really well. I mean, I had one.
Yeah, made the save and just the scratch.
You can still make it, yeah.
But yeah, maybe the
hits
melter shot
with
was
one
not
save and just a scratch, surprisingly good. I've also found that tough gets, so also surprisingly good. You know, having a 4-up with a reroll on saves means that most of the small arms fire and even the medium arms fire, plasma guns, crack grenades, tend not to do much more than one hit, which tends not to be enough to really push you into injury range or being scared of your opponent at all range. So then you just hit more buttons and scoop up more points and put the fear of orcs in your opponent.
Yeah.
Also, so Travis had mentioned the hooking a hammer shot through a door, and I do want to break that down a little bit for anyone that doesn't know how this works. On Into the Dark, if you touch a hatchway, you can hatchway fight, and then that puts you, like, you count as within control range of enemies that are within 2 of the door. So someone could be, like, 2.1 inches away from you, and they're within 2 of the door, and you run up and you touch the door, you hit them with the explosive hammer, and then that explodes around that target that is 2.1 away from you, and will also explode anyone within 1 inch of that target. So if people try to, like, cluster around a door, or if they, like, try to, like, build up for something that lets them... There's 2 operatives on a door because they're going to, like, one's going to open and one's going to do whatever. Then they're trying to build a combo, and you just explode hammer to kill everyone, including the explodey hammer orc. Pretty good trade.
Yeah, there's a little bit of extra wiggle room, and this is a thing that I think works on both In the Dark and on Volcus, where you can have access to hatchway fights. So the Demolisher ends up being a very good door toucher and a door opener because he can just stand around and just threaten your opponent. And if your opponent comes in and tries to shoot him, it's all right. He dodges a little bit of 4 damage attacks, so he can take a couple extra shots. And if your opponent is not being super paying attention and you hook a Demolisher shot and you hit your opponent with a doorway fight and they've staged incorrectly, you can definitely catch people unawares.
Mm-hmm. And it's just a fun moment if you roll like super hot and everybody explodes. It's just it's just fun.
The vision of a hammer just like getting thrown through a wall and a little in the distance you just hear there's like a door that flies off its hinges.
A cloud of smoke comes out of the windows of the stronghold.
Yeah. Someone are like, wait, what happened? It's like, oh, well, I don't know. George went over that door to check what's going on, and I guess he's dead now.
He literally just opens the door and throws his hammer inside.
As 2 more bomb squigs go in. And then the other, I think probably one of the bigger things about Wreckas is they have pretty solid spooky matchups against elves if elves don't cluster, like if they aren't staging 100% correctly, because the bomb squigs, instead of being blast 1 threats, are actually blast 2 threats, because you can hit a kaboom, so they can run up, kaboom themselves, turn into blast 2, and then suddenly the explosion radius is quite large.
Yeah, elves are good matchups for the Wrecka boys, although I had a tie with the Void Dancer on my tournament yesterday, but it's also a really good player. And we ended up actually playing like 16-16 or something like that. Because they are really...
The Wreckas definitely have more than enough stats to kind of make a lot of different things your opponent's problems. So your opponents do need to be very cognizant of what's going on.
Yeah. But also the shooting of elves is really extreme. So they can delete an orc off the board pretty easily with a fusion pistol, for instance.
I have a couple of questions for both of you. One of them, how often do you take that extra armor that gives you the 13 wounds and the slower movement? And the second one is what tac ops? Let's start with the extra armor. What are both of your thoughts on that extra armor?
Well, I have like 9 or 10 games now with them, and I never took it because the restriction to movement just feels too bad for me just to gain 1 point of HP. So
especially since it takes an equipment slot.
Yeah, additionally. But maybe there's some math in it that there are some breakpoints you can handle better if you take the +1 HP, but I don't see a real use of it.
I found that staging on Volcus tends to be a little bit harder than I was expecting, mostly around when you lose that extra inch of movement. Now you have to set yourself up that much more aggressively, and it also means that for some cases you can't get a Wrecka with a hole into a position that's useful, because then you're -2 and you have a 4-inch or 6-inch charge through a door, which can be pretty rough.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the end of the world, and I definitely have taken it a couple times. Right now, against like elf teams, I probably wouldn't take it, even though I think on a conceptual level, I want that extra wound against both power swords and bolter fire, because 13 wounds means bolter fire generally is not going to kill you, even with a stray critical landing, and power swords do not two-shot you, even on 2 crits. So there are lots of cases where I would expect to want them, but because I've been taking more breakaway fighters to punch holes in walls, I'm feeling the 1-inch tax a lot more than I would have expected. So I have tended to not use it as much. Against the elites, I feel like the extra wound has been useful, because having that 13 wounds means that your enemy chainsword just is not going to threaten you at all, and that extra wound helps you a lot on the normal hits.
Okay, yeah, so
that's kind of where I've landed.
You've pretty much called out like every single kind of weapon, and I do want to point out that 12 to 13 wounds, especially as like a longtime Phobos player, is like the biggest change in the game. Because like if the number of hits it takes for things that are 2 damage, 3 damage, 4 damage, and 6 damage, which is almost everything in the game, takes a whole extra hit. And a whole extra hit, it's like with 6 damage hits, that makes you 50% more durable. Because it goes from 2 hits to 3, which is a enormous impact. It's like such a huge change. And then when it comes to like 4 damage hits, it goes from 4 to 5 hits, and that's a 25% increase. And then if you kind of like, if you break it down by that and you look at how many hits it takes for every single thing, it ruins every single breakpoint. It's like the biggest durability upgrade in the entire game is going from 12 to 13 wounds.
Yeah, the math is really good, but you will feel the movement restriction in such a hard way, especially if you have to go through access points with 5-inch movement. It's suddenly 4-inch movement. You can't go anywhere. You cannot charge anyone, and you want to charge anyone. You know, maybe you're super tanky, but you don't reach any place on the map you really want to reach. So that's at least my
and then people can non-reciprocal you all day.
Yeah, I think it's really the reciprocalization that ends up being problematic. It's not unworkable, and I have found it useful to take it. It's just that you need to have a game plan for where all your operatives are going to move. And like I said, because I'm having more accessible points, those tend to feel a little bit harder, because now I'm getting double tax more often than I would like to. When I don't think I'm going to get double tax, I'm only going to get single tax, where the accessible means that your opponent's like on a point. So I think there's a map where there's a central small Volcus stronghold. On that map, I'm fine taking the extra movement penalty, because all of the movement is going to be centered into a specific location. Then I'm going to take extra armor. On maps where I need to spread out a little bit more and I need to be able to get to a further thing, generally it's going to be a little bit harder for me to justify, just because I don't have the extra staging points. So I think in the dark specifically, for some of these big room maps, it tends to feel much worse, because there's no room for you to use the extra movement, because you have to stage up anyways, and you're kind of left in the wind. So it really just depends, and I have found it useful. I'm probably at like 30% of my games, or 30, like a third of my games, I'm taking the armor, and then the other 66 I'm taking the movement, so that I can shoot around the board a little bit more efficiently.
Yeah, so it is kind of mostly matchup dependent, or not matchup, map dependent.
I think it's like matchup and map dependent, really, because if there are movement lanes where I'm going to be in one spot and I can stage for that one spot reasonably well, which there are a couple of them, there's that one map on In the Dark where there's a staging point on the mid part of the map, then you don't really need the extra movement as much, because you are just going to stage up next to the doors and you just run up to the wall and wait for your opponent. Then it's fine. If I got to spread out into these big open rooms where I need to like sit in my own cover, then getting that 8 inches for that, or the first 7-inch move, because you're getting accessible taxed as you go through the door, then your first staging point is a little bit harder. Someone else has got to open the door. All that stuff kind of leads up to me making, maybe not wanting it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
The breakpoint is a real breakpoint, and it is an important one to make sure that you're actually thinking about, because you can just always take it and you could just never take it, but it's probably wrong in every situation to just always do one or the other, would be my guess.
Yeah, I think I agree with that too. And moving on to TAC ops, do you kind of have like a bunch of options, or is there one that seems pretty obviously the best TAC op for Wreckas?
Well, I only played 2 different TAC ops in the tournament, and also in all the Wrecka games I had before. Contain, and the other one was this security thing, but only on Volcus I played this Seize Ground thing. Is it called Seize Ground? where you have
take
to
ground,
inside of the stronghold. This was pretty easy to make because of the breaker boy who just goes through the wall and then stands there.
Standing there menacingly.
Yeah, and then if you give him 3 APL, you have even more control over there. But I had good experience with Contain, especially with elites, or if you know your opponent a little bit and you know he's playing KG, then you can pick Contain and score it pretty reliably, because they have to be wholly within your territory to deny the one victory point, and wholly within 6 of your drop zone to deny the other. So, and that's, you can play.
I've actually generally found that security is a pretty good starting point. I do a lot of take ground, I do a lot of contain. Done overrun, I think once, in Storm Hostile once, and those were fine. I think part of the issue with those is once you go in, a lot of times you die. So if you're going to be doing you're kind of always having the same game plan of getting up to the mid board, then pushing into your opponent's side. And both contain and a lot of the move forward aggressively things for Seek and Destroy kind of work similarly. And it's better for you to just force your opponent into awkward positions with security than it is to just have your opponent's secondary goal be like to turn around and shoot whoever shows up and kill whoever's on their side, right? Whereas if you're forcing contain or take ground, your opponent has to respond in movement along with your movement, so you also incur kind of an APL penalty on them because they now have to move into these spots. So if you're like rushing them, then forcing them to go contain, like June said, they got to run all the way to the other side, and then you might just be in the waiting arms of a bomb squig. So I found good value on, I think, both ends of the spectrum. Against Marines, doing champion can be good because you can just generally have some legal targets, and then forcing your opponent to run away is also perfectly hilarious as far as game plans go.
Yeah, especially if you're like throwing some chip damage out there, and then you've got wounded Marines all over the place that are easy targets for champion.
It's definitely feels like the case in my number of games. To be fair, I haven't played all that many games, but making sure that you're paying attention to where you're going to line up your operatives is really important. Mostly if you're taking extra armor, because then once you're committed to a spot, you're not leaving the spot. So you do got to make sure that you've committed yourself to the correct area. We talked about the range operatives and the Pulsa. I talked about the Demolisher and the Crusher, being good staging models. We obviously haven't talked about the Knob or the Bomb Squigs, but I did mention that.
There's only one left. It's the guy with the burger patties. The guy who makes the orc burgers.
Yeah. Yeah, go for it. I mean, we got the Crusher. He is an important piece. He's got the ability to shove some people around, and there are some interesting movement mechanics. So if you have any big notable things where you were able to shove someone around into a new spot and then, use it as a launching point, let us know. Yeah. We got a little bit of time.
It's just a bit sad that on paper you can do so crazy and funny stuff with him. It's like the Dozer from the Hothkin Salvagers, who also can push people around, but it seems to just not happen in so many times, because he is also with 5-6 damage. You maybe push around your opponent for 2 inches and then he's dead, or maybe only 1 if he's hurt. And also, if you want to go through an access point on Into the Dark, you cannot really push through with 1 inch of movement, because you would end in the middle of the door, so you can place your orc there. So the push mechanic will not work there. And yeah, it's a bit sad that there's not a real use of his ability. But otherwise, he's a cool model, because he can only be hit with crits that you all actually roll, like natural crits. You cannot have Rending or Lethal 5 up against him. And yeah, it's a pretty strong operative. And the big uncle of the Dozer.
I've actually thought that he is you use him as a forward charging threat that stages up really aggressively, and you don't actually kill your opponent. You actually run up to your opponent, kind of how Jason was using Nemesis Claw to kind of threaten positionally. You shove your opponent into a new spot and then keep him there and don't kill him, because you could take a couple hits, and then the next turn you smush him and then you charge into another spot. But that smush has now moved you all the way up an extra couple inches. So your first charge is an 8 or 7 inch charge, depending on whether or not you have the extra inch of movement. You get the extra inch from the crush and you wait, and then you push up afterwards and go crush someone else or stage again. So he's kind of like a slow wrecking ball that drags around the map rather than an instant kill piece that then gets a movement, because there's nowhere else for you to go. You can't do another charge. So that's how I've conceived of him. Turns out, though, that a lot of the times your opponents are behind stupid barricades, and you're only just about to get to the barricade anyways, so you don't really get to do anything too fun. It can be a little disappointing, but that's just how the game is. Sometimes life is full of little disappointments.
When you nudge him for an inch, could you nudge him closer to you and then kind of like go wrap around the barricade? I haven't looked at the rules that close.
I think it has to be further away from you, if I remember correctly. Let me take a look, though. That's a good final question before we switch back to June. Or actually, June, while we're looking it up, go ahead.
Yeah, there's one thing I wanted to try out, but I haven't yet. But you can always explode your bomb squigs, right? Because you're the primary target. You don't pick another target first. You just pick yourself. So if you're really low on Wrecka points or have 0, you could actually sacrifice both of your squigs to bomb themselves. So if you make a shooting attack against the other squig, you roll 6 dice against yourself. And then the other bomb, if you kill then you roll 6 another dice against the target, so it's 12. And if the bomb squig, the second one, explodes on death, you can roll another 6 dice. So it's 18 dice of possible Wrecka points, correct?
I think part of the issue is that the shoot action with this weapon can only be performed within control range of an enemy operative. So while
they have to be really close to each other, yeah. Oh, you mean enemy operative?
It does say that you can do a shoot within engagement range. I don't know if you can just perform a shoot against your friendly operatives. It
says
also,
don't pick a valid target, It says you don't pick a valid target.
Yes, but you can only start the shoot action if you're within control range. I'm curious.
I don't know.
I think Travis is going to find the book right now.
Okay.
I'm going to look it up on the app too.
I thought you can explode whenever you want it. Ah, yeah, you're right, maybe. You can perform...
So generally, valid targeting does require you to select an enemy target, so that hasn't gone away. So I think that you do need to have someone within control range or someone, to actually get it to fire, which is disappointing. So, doesn't quite work. I would like for it to work.
Yeah, you're correct. Within control of enemy operatives, like the first thing that has to be true, and then all the other stuff. Ah, sad.
I'm sorry. Life is full of little disappointments.
Well, if you have both of the bomb squigs charge the same target, and then the second one blows up, now you're going to have like a bajillion dice of Wrecka points.
Yeah,
that is true.
And a double explosion.
That part definitely does work the way that we want that to.
Or if you stage one that's like within explosion range of an enemy operative that's expended, and then you run another bomb squig up to an enemy that is in daisy chain explosion range of the other one that's staged, and then you blow up in daisy chain explosion and hit 2 targets with 2 bomb squigs in a single activation.
Yeah, but that maybe you would exceed the 6 point Wrecka point cap anyways.
Just go from 0 to 6. Call it a day.
It is a hell of a drug once you know that you have the Wrecka points and you're like, whatever I do here, it cannot miss.
Yeah.
Pretty spooky.
Yeah, and that actually is one of my big pain points on using the Pulsar, to circle all the way back around to the Rocketeer, because we talked about the two main options it has. But my biggest problem with the Pulsar is you generally want to fire it as like the very first thing you're doing, or like one of the earliest activations in a game. And in that case, you're doing 6 attacks on 5s, and on the chance that you only hit 1 or 2, the 3-inch bubble is pretty easy to avoid because there's a very specific new instancing timing for when you update your stats on your operatives, and it is after and before you do an action. So if you have a 3-inch bubble, generally your opponent can just run through the speed bubble and not be affected by it. And that's been something that I've noticed, and it definitely hurts.
Yeah. And you don't have the Wrecka points at the beginning of the game, so there's always a chance you miss all your shots, and then you have a 1-inch bubble, which goes away at the start of the second turning point, and it's wasted.
Yeah, I think of my 3 pulsifiers, I think I've landed 3 hits even with rerolls. So it's been pretty thoroughly whelming in my experience, but that's not to say that it is always going to be thoroughly whelming. I think it is a pretty strong ability. It's just right now the metagame doesn't really favor hitting hordes particularly hard because there's not that many horde teams floating around. Like hitting the Inquisition agents early, that's not bad, but elites, you land it once, it's good, but it's not going to thoroughly stop them unless there are specific parts of the map that they need to get through. So matchup dependent, definitely a thing. Having the reliability of a thermonuclear bomb in the background with a Rocketeer has been pretty nice because Blast 3, hard to avoid.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Sweet. Well, this has been a fun episode. Any final shout-outs that you want to do for local people or any cool tips or tricks that we missed?
Yeah, of course. I wanted to make a shout out to my local club in Leipzig, which is the Tabletop Saxony Club. And thanks to everyone there for making it possible. We have such a great space there with really huge tables and huge stuff to freely use for games. Yeah, you're just the best, guys. Also, I want to greet the Berlin guys of Panteras and One Plus Invuln, Fabian and Sven and Alex and everyone. You're really great, and thanks for the support and everything.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on, and this was definitely a fun one. And thank you, listeners, for listening until the end.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. See you next year, maybe.